At precisely 1:47 in the morning, the digital eyes guarding the house went completely dark. Attempt to answer the singular chilling question that hangs over this entire investigation. What? The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately recognized the significance of this date and initiated a massive retrospective sweep. They began requesting and meticulously analyzing historical video feeds from the entire neighborhood, specifically targeting the hours surrounding that mid-January disturbance. They were no longer just looking for the aftermath of a crime. They were hunting for the architectural blueprints of an impending tragedy. The investigators were searching for the subtle digital echoes of a suspect conducting reconnaissance. This reveals a staggering level of terrifying patience. The alleged intruder was acting as a phantom neighbor, existing in the negative space between the manicured lawns and the silent streets. They were mapping the blind spots, learning the patrol routes, and testing the perimeter defenses without ever making a definitive move. This completely shatters the false narrative of the guilty local. The evidence strongly indicates that the perpetrator utilized the affluent ecosystem not as a home, but as a temporary operational base. Exactly did the suspected intruder do inside that dark, silent house during those 41? They exploited the inherent privacy of the neighborhood, turning the large properties and secluded driveways into an expansive camouflage net. This is the ultimate misdirection. While the community might have been looking at each other with quiet suspicion, the real danger was a faceless entity that had weaponized their environment against them. The suspect understood that true invisibility is not about hiding in the dark, but about becoming a natural, unnoticed part of the background. Please let me know in the comments section what your theories are regarding how a suspected criminal manages to conduct such extensive physical surveillance in a modern subdivision without triggering a single proactive police response. The realization that an unseen watcher was charting the vulnerabilities of the neighborhood for weeks elevates the psychological horror of this case to an entirely new level. It implies that the violent climax was not a spontaneous decision, but the final step in a meticulously engineered timeline. The Phantom had gathered all the necessary intelligence. The vulnerabilities were exposed. The stage was perfectly set. And this terrifying preamble leads us directly into the heart of the darkest mystery surrounding the night the attack finally commenced. Unaccounted for, minutes before the heart monitor of Nancy Guthrie vanished from the network, we must now confront the agonizing reality of the execution phase, where the digital forensic trail reveals a truth far more devastating than a simple home invasion. The preparation was flawless, and the resulting silence was absolute. The residents of the Catalina Foothills were forced to grapple with the sickening revelation that their perceived sanctuary had been entirely compromised. Every quiet evening spent on a patio, every routine walk down the heavily shaded avenues, and every moment of assumed privacy was potentially monitored by a disciplined predator. The federal mandate to review the footage from the 11th of January was a desperate attempt to catch a ghost on film, to find one single frame where the alleged attacker made a mistake. But the Phantom remained elusive, leaving behind only the unsettling implication of their presence. This prolonged period of invisible stalking fundamentally changes the narrative from a sudden violent strike to a slow creeping dread. The neighborhood was a chessboard, and the suspect had spent weeks quietly moving their pieces. The quiet, affluent streets of the Catalina Foothills are designed to offer an impenetrable illusion of safety. Into position, while the residents remain completely unaware of the game being played. The tension of this realization sets the stage for the catastrophic event that followed. The meticulous scouting, the reliance on natural camouflage, and the deliberate avoidance of digital tripwires all culminated in a focused, targeted operation. This was the terrifying prelude to the digital blackout. The darkest and most haunting void in this entire investigation lies hidden within those excruciating 41 minutes of unaccounted time. The initial timeline established a terrifying parameter, but it is the forensic interpretation of the medical data that truly shatters the soul. We must critically examine the precise moment the implanted cardiac device recorded its final transmission. The sudden severing of the digital connection was not merely a technical glitch or a battery failure. In the specialized field of digital forensics, the loss of a localized signal tells a highly specific physical story. The cardiac monitor relies on a continuous proximity to a dedicated cellular device, usually resting on a bedside table to transmit its vital statistics. Wide roads winding through meticulously manicured desert landscapes create a barrier of wealth and isolation, where the greatest perceived threat is a wandering coyote. When the synchronization abruptly vanished in the middle of the night, it indicated one of two deeply traumatic scenarios. The first, and perhaps most chilling possibility, is a physical separation. The sudden loss of the wireless handshake implies that the victim was forcefully moved away from the stationary transmitting hub. This means the 41-minute window was not spent merely ransacking the property for valuables or searching for a safe. That agonizing duration was utilized to orchestrate the complex and silent extraction of an elderly individual from the premises. The physical mechanics required to accomplish this without alerting the surrounding environment are staggering to contemplate. The perpetrator had to control the situation, manage the physical environment, and maneuver a human being through the shadows of a neighborhood heavily saturated with overlapping security zones. The silence of the operation is its most terrifying characteristic. The alleged attacker managed to slip through the invisible web of neighborhood defenses, carrying out an abduction with a level of precision that borders on the impossible. Yet anomalies had already begun to fracture this peaceful facade weeks before the digital silence of that February night. The second potential reason for the sudden cessation of the medical data stream is infinitely more devastating. A sudden, catastrophic medical event induced by extreme terror or physical trauma would cause the heart to stop beating entirely, instantly terminating the vital data feed at the source. Both forensic interpretations lead to a conclusion of immense tragedy and calculated cruelty. This specific timestamp is not just a line on a police report. It is the exact moment the victim was either carried into the absolute unknown or the moment her life was violently extinguished within the confines of her own supposedly secure sanctuary. The sheer logistical nightmare of navigating an unconscious or terrified hostage out of that specific architectural layout demands a chilling level of operational awareness. The suspect had to know the exact angles of the street lamps, the precise overlapping fields of view of the adjacent properties, and the specific acoustic properties of the desert night, where even the crunch of gravel can echo for blocks. According to local resident Aldine Meister, a strange man had been seen lingering in the neighborhood. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update as we continue to track the forensic analysis that might finally explain how this silent extraction was physically achieved. The realization of what those 41 minutes truly represent shifts the entire emotional weight of the narrative. It transforms a mystery about a severed wire into a visceral nightmare about human vulnerability. The alleged predator did not rush. They operated with a cold, calculated, deliberate pacing. They used the cover of darkness not just to hide their approach, but to completely swallow their departure. The forensic reality is that the victim was taken right out from under the collective gaze of a highly vigilant community. The technological infrastructure designed to provide absolute security was effortlessly bypassed by someone who understood that the greatest weakness in any system is the assumption of safety. The tragic silence of the cardiac monitor is the ultimate proof of the devastating effectiveness of the perpetrator. It is a chilling reminder that no amount of digital encryption or wireless monitoring can prevent a sufficiently motivated and disciplined human threat from crossing the threshold. Meister noted that this unidentified individual was wandering the residential streets dressed in attire entirely inappropriate for a casual fitness walk. The terrifying void left behind in the data logs is a monument to the meticulous cruelty of the suspect. They left no digital trail, no scattered belongings, and no frantic distress signals. They simply vanished into the void, taking all the answers with them and leaving behind a forensic puzzle that continues to defy conventional investigative techniques. The true horror lies in the absolute silence of the extraction, a silent scream recorded only by the abrupt termination of a Bluetooth signal. The realization that such a complex and violent act could be executed with zero acoustic or visual leakage fundamentally alters our understanding of suburban security. It forces law enforcement to admit that they are dealing with an adversary who operates entirely outside the boundaries of typical criminal behavior. The void remains open, challenging the very foundations of modern forensic science to explain the impossible. The current phase of the investigation has transitioned into an agonizing waiting game where the relentless speed of digital analysis clashes with the painstakingly slow reality of biological science. The immediate surrounding area has been completely exhausted of digital clues. This was a subtle but piercing disruption in a community where routines are predictable and strangers are immediately noticeable. Every hard drive has been cloned, every server log has been parsed, and every cellular tower dump has been meticulously cross-referenced. Yet the identity of the heavily concealed phantom remains entirely elusive. The focus has now necessarily shifted toward the physical remnants left behind by the alleged attacker. The sprawling hunt for the specialized tactical equipment carried by the suspect during the intrusion has become a massive logistical undertaking. Law enforcement agencies are canvassing retail outlets, poring over purchase histories, and monitoring secondary marketplaces in a desperate bid to track the origin of the gear. Finding the source of that specialized load-bearing equipment could potentially blow the entire case wide open, providing a direct link to the financial footprint of the perpetrator. However, tracing mass-produced consumer goods is a monumental challenge that requires immense patience and resources. The authorities are essentially searching for a needle in a global haystack, hoping that a single serial number or a unique point-of-sale transaction will finally reveal the face hidden beneath the mask. But the presence of this lingering observer was only one piece of a much larger, more disturbing environmental shift. This is the excruciating reality of modern investigative work. While a camera can capture a crime in milliseconds, identifying the individual requires months of grueling, methodical legwork. The suspect executed a digitally flawless operation, but human biology and physical reality are notoriously difficult to completely sanitize. Every step taken, every breath exhaled, and every surface touched carries the potential for microscopic transference. The entire law enforcement apparatus is currently holding its collective breath, waiting for microscopic evidence to yield a definitive profile. The alleged predator may have successfully blinded the electronic sentinels and manipulated the environmental variables to their advantage, but they cannot erase the fundamental laws of physical contact. A microscopic error, a single misplaced fiber, or a microscopic droplet of sweat could ultimately be the catalyst that dismantles their carefully constructed anonymity. Until the laboratory results are finalized, the community remains suspended in a state of terrifying uncertainty. The physical environment is clear, but the psychological atmosphere is suffocating. Someone physically disconnected the front door security camera, cutting off the only live feed to the outside world and plunging the property into a manufactured blindness. The Catalina Foothills area, like many upscale suburban enclaves, contains several unoccupied properties. Every passing day without an arrest amplifies the underlying anxiety that a highly capable predator is still moving freely, potentially observing a new target or planning their next operation. The sophisticated nature of the attack guarantees that this investigation will not be resolved quickly. It is a slow, methodical, grinding process of elimination where science must painstakingly piece together what the darkness tried to consume. The digital silence has been thoroughly documented, but the biological truth is still fighting its way to the surface. We are witnessing a high-stakes race against time, where the meticulous nature of the suspect is pitted against the relentless progression of forensic technology. The answers are hidden within the microscopic details, locked away in sterile laboratories, waiting for the right scientific key to finally unlock the identity of the unseen watcher. The sheer magnitude of the unresolved questions continues to haunt the investigative teams. How does an individual possess the specialized knowledge to perfectly time their extraction with the limitations of medical technology? Law enforcement experts and security analysts have alleged that a sophisticated predator would not view these vacant homes simply as empty real estate. This level of operational sophistication strongly implies that the alleged perpetrator possesses a background in specialized tactical training. The authorities are actively profiling individuals with extensive knowledge of physical security countermeasures. The community must now endure the torturous reality that the person responsible for shattering their peace of mind is a highly organized predator who carefully engineered a catastrophic event and then vanished into the ether. The agonizing silence of the unanswered questions is a heavy burden for the family to bear. They are trapped in a liminal space between the violent incident and the eventual resolution, waiting for a scientific breakthrough that feels impossibly far away. The relentless pursuit of justice relies entirely on the hope that the attacker made a single microscopic miscalculation in an otherwise flawless execution. The digital ghosts have faded, and now only the slow, deliberate march of empirical science remains to guide the way forward. What this case teaches us about the weaponization of suburban spaces is profoundly disturbing and requires a fundamental shift in how we all perceive residential security. The modern reliance on smart home technology, specifically wireless doorbell cameras, provides a dangerous illusion of impenetrable safety. Instead, these abandoned structures provide perfect staging areas. We install these devices believing they create a digital fortress around our families. However, this investigation brutally exposes the reality that consumer-grade electronics are easily defeated by a specialized threat. A skilled predator understands that wireless signals can be jammed, devices can be physically disconnected, and localized networks can be entirely compromised. The critical lesson here is that physical security, robust deadbolts, reinforced entry points, and environmental awareness must always supersede digital monitoring. A camera can only record an intrusion. It cannot physically prevent a door from being violently breached. Furthermore, this case highlights a terrifying evolution in criminal methodology. We are witnessing the rise of the data-driven predator. Suspects no longer need to physically break into a home to understand its layout. They exploit open source intelligence utilizing public real estate listings, satellite imagery, and even municipal zoning records to map a target before ever setting foot in the neighborhood. They offer elevated vantage points and shadowed driveways where a suspect can monitor neighborhood schedules, track the response. They leverage the vast amount of freely available data to locate staging areas within vacant properties, turning the inherent isolation of upscale communities into a tactical advantage. The modern forensic landscape has permanently changed. Investigators must now look far beyond traditional physical evidence. They are forced to hunt for data footprints, the invisible electronic trails left behind when a device is maliciously severed from its network. Understanding this intersection of physical vulnerability and digital manipulation is absolutely crucial for protecting ourselves against an adversary who uses our own technological convenience as a primary weapon of attack. The most terrifying aspect of this unresolved mystery is not the violence that occurred in the shadows, but the absolute failure of the systems we trust to keep the darkness at bay. The greatest enemy in this scenario was the unwavering belief that a glowing light on a front porch camera equated to genuine safety. The alleged attacker understood that comfort breeds complacency, and they exploited that weakness with devastating precision. As the forensic analysis slowly grinds forward, the community is left to grapple with an unbearable paranoia, times of private security patrols, and document the habits of vulnerable residents without ever triggering a single motion sensor. Every disconnected signal or brief Wi-Fi outage is no longer just a technical annoyance. It is a potential warning sign of an approaching threat. I want you to ask yourself a deeply unsettling question tonight. If your own security system suddenly went entirely offline at 1:47 in the morning, what exactly would you do during the next 41 minutes? I am Liam, and I deeply appreciate you joining me on Shadows. Please click the video currently on your screen to explore another chilling case where digital evidence proved to be the absolute difference between life and death. I will see you all in the next investigation. The terrifying reality is that the predator did not simply arrive on the night of the crime. The staging areas, the lingering stranger, the quiet observation all suggest that the surrounding neighborhood itself had been weaponized. The community was transformed into a silent hunting ground where the feeling of security was nothing more than a carefully exploited vulnerability, leaving every resident unaware of the meticulous surveillance happening right outside their bedroom windows. The transition from a quiet weekend evening into a digital void happened without a single neighbor raising an alarm. But in our modern era of interconnected devices, the absence of video does not mean an absence of data. The 84-year-old victim was last seen alive at her residence on the evening of January 31st. Her life was characterized by predictable, comforting routines, making any deviation a massive red flag for those who knew her well. The first undeniable fracture in her daily pattern occurred the following morning on Sunday, February 1st. She completely failed to log on and attend her scheduled online church service. This absence was not a mere oversight or a technical glitch. It was a glaring void in a life built on faith and community connection. The failure to appear virtually was the catalyst that transformed a quiet Sunday morning into an active missing persons investigation. When authorities finally breached the perimeter of the Catalina Foothills home, the sterile silence of the disconnected digital devices was immediately contrasted by a stark, horrifying physical reality. Investigators discovered blood outside the residence. This was no longer just a case of missing digital signals or severed Bluetooth connections. 41 minutes later, at exactly 2:28 in the morning, a much more intimate piece of technology registered a terrifying anomaly. The physical environment had been violently disturbed. Subsequent forensic DNA testing on the blood found at the scene confirmed absolutely that the blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. The discovery of her blood at the threshold of her own home forces a terrifying realization upon anyone looking at this timeline. A physical struggle took place. A violent confrontation occurred in the very spot where she should have been the most secure. Yet the neighborhood remained silent. The carefully constructed fortress of the Catalina Foothills failed to protect her. The blood on the ground confirmed the violence, while the disconnected servers confirmed the premeditation, leaving investigators staring at a crime scene where the physical evidence screamed of a struggle, but the digital evidence had been surgically erased. The final image captured by the security system before it was manually deactivated is a portrait of calculated anonymity. At 1:47 in the morning, the camera lens recorded an unknown suspect approaching the property. The individual was heavily concealed, wearing a mask to obscure facial features, long sleeves to hide, identifying marks or tattoos and gloves to ensure no fingerprints were left on the camera housing or the door frame. A pacemaker, a medical device implanted inside the chest of an 84-year-old woman, lost its synchronization with her mobile phone. Additionally, the suspect was carrying a specific Ozark Trail brand backpack, a detail that suggests they arrived equipped with tools or supplies necessary for the intrusion. This final frame is chilling in its professionalism, but the most deeply disturbing revelation regarding the surveillance of this home comes from a completely different angle. According to reports from CNN and Parade magazine, local resident Laura Gargano observed from aerial imagery that the roof of the victim seemed abnormally clean and disturbed. This observation reportedly led to the discovery of a hidden camera purposefully mounted on the roof of the victim. This is a staggering escalation in predatory behavior. The suspect did not just approach the house to blind its defenses. They allegedly established their own overwatch. By placing a camera on the roof, the alleged predator created a permanent panopticon gazing down upon the property, monitoring every arrival, every departure, and every moment of vulnerability. This means the suspect knew exactly when the 84-year-old woman was alone and exactly when the neighborhood was asleep. But establishing this level of dominance over the environment raises a monumental question that continues to haunt the investigation. This invisible severing of a Bluetooth connection in the dead of night is the cold, clinical. If this suspect was methodical enough to install a hidden roof cameraware, full facial concealment, and manually disable the front door security feed, how did they plan to extract an abducted victim from a neighborhood overflowing with secondary security cameras without leaving a definitive trace? If you find the calculated precision of this alleged predator as deeply unsettling as I do, please hit the like button so we can continue to expose these complex forensic timelines. The burden of unraveling this meticulously planned extraction fell to the authorities commanding the investigation. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos spearheaded a massive law enforcement response, turning the quiet streets of the Catalina Foothills into a sprawling grid of forensic inquiry. Sheriff Nanos confirmed the discovery of the blood at the scene and mobilized resources to track any possible egress route. The strategy was to look beyond the immediate property line and hunt for the inevitable mistakes a suspect makes when fleeing a scene. This expansive search yielded a critical physical breadcrumb. Approximately 2 miles away from the quiet residence, investigators recovered a pair of discarded gloves, pulse of a mystery that has baffled federal investigators and terrified a community. These gloves, abandoned in the dark, are currently being subjected to advanced genetic genealogy DNA testing. The discovery of these gloves 2 miles away provides the first tangible vector of the escape route, proving that the suspect moved a significant distance through the surrounding area after the violent encounter. But the physical evidence alone could not explain the logistics of the getaway. The timeline required a vehicle, and the digital footprint of that vehicle was captured far beyond the immediate neighborhood. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, roughly 2.5 miles away from the crime scene, a separate neighborhood security camera recorded vehicles leaving the general area. This timestamp is the most critical anchor in the entire forensic investigation. It perfectly aligns with the 2:28 morning disconnection of the pacemaker. The chronological sequence is devastatingly precise. The house camera dies at 1:47. Welcome to Shadows with Liam, where we decode the digital footprints left behind by the most calculated minds. The violent struggle leaves blood at the entryway. The pacemaker loses its connection at 2:28, and 2 minutes later at 2:30, vehicles are seen fleeing the perimeter 2.5 miles away. Every piece of data points toward a highly synchronized extraction. The suspect bypassed the immediate surveillance network, traveled 2 miles to discard the gloves, and utilized a vehicle that was positioned just far enough away to avoid the immediate neighborhood cameras, but close enough to facilitate a rapid escape precisely as the medical device went dark. The initial shock wave of a violent intrusion in a highly secure residential enclave almost always triggers a desperate search for immediate answers. Human nature dictates that when the perimeter is breached, the mind automatically suspects those who already reside within the walls. Rumors quickly circulate and public speculation inevitably turns its gaze toward the closest proximity. The whispers begin to suggest that perhaps a malicious local, a familiar face with sinister intentions, is responsible for the unthinkable. I invite you to subscribe to the channel right now as we dissect this forensic timeline but the emerging evidence in this deeply unsettling mystery points toward a far more terrifying reality. The true threat was not born from within the community. It was an external predator that had seamlessly blended into the peripheral shadows. To understand the depth of this premeditation, federal agents had to rewind the timeline far beyond the night of the attack. They shifted their focus to a seemingly insignificant moment that occurred weeks prior on the 11th of January. On that particular winter night, a local resident named Jeff Lamy experienced a disruption in the usual quiet. His dog began barking with an intense, unusual aggression, directing its alarm toward the vast, empty darkness surrounding the property. In a standard suburban setting, a barking dog is easily dismissed as a reaction to local wildlife. But in the context of a sophisticated predatory campaign, an animal reacting to an unseen presence is a critical red flag. This specific behavioral anomaly from the pet belonging to Lammy became a pivotal anchor for the authorities.